Our next lesson in the Civil War is called Pickett's Charge. Our objectives for this lesson are to recognize the importance of the Battle of Gettysburg on the international front and at home, and to recall the third day's events in the Battle of Gettysburg. Look at your vocabulary words. I'm going to read a word and then read a definition and then say the word. I want you to repeat the word after me. A long continuous burst of gunfire is a barrage. Under attack or subject to controversy is embattled. To turn away or defeat is repulse. The leading forces in a military attack is a spearhead. Do you have a favorite movie? You know the one. You've seen it so many times you can recite every line of every scene. Your scenes hate watching it with you because you quote each line right before it is spoken. Even though you know what is going to happen next, you still cannot stop watching it over and over again. It would sometimes be nice if real life was that way, except for one little twist. You can change the next scene before it happens. You know something is going to turn out to be a disaster, so you change the ending. Woohoo! No more making a lot of dumb decisions. No more saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. No more bad grades. Just flick the switch and rewind life. Alas, it is time to come back down to earth and face reality. Life is not that way, face it. Life does not always provide you with a clear path. Sometimes it comes down to a matter of faith or the use of your better judgment. Either way, when it is all said and done, you have to live with the choices you make. When the choices involve war, things become much more serious. When a commanding officer makes a mistake, people die. Today you will learn about a critical error in judgment made by Robert E. Lee. His error cost the lives of thousands of men. Okay, so in your notes, go ahead and write the date. The importance of Gettysburg. Often people do not recognize the one thing that completely changes the outcome of an event as it happens. Later they look back and realize that a particular situation was the defining moment. Such was the case at the Battle of Gettysburg. In retrospect, this one battle signaled the beginning of the end of the war. Up to this point, the South had won victory after victory. Each win made the Confederacy appear to be invincible. People living in the North were becoming discouraged, and it was all Lincoln could do to keep the Union together. It was here at Gettysburg that era of invincibility disappeared. Just as important, both England and France were on the verge of giving military and economic assistance to the Confederacy. If the South could score a major victory on Northern soil, it would be convincing proof to the European nations that the Confederacy was for real. Without their aid, the war could not last much longer, and the South would be doomed to defeat. Finally, Lee was fully aware that Southern manpower was beginning to run out. Even though he had won a series of victories, each cost the lives of many men who were not being replaced. Many of his troops were going hungry and did not have sufficient clothes or shoes. Time was running out for the Confederate nation. Any hope of winning depended on the outcome of this battle. It would be decided here. That may be why Lee insisted on fighting rather than waiting for another opportunity in a few months. Okay, now we talked about at the end of day one, the Confederates won day one, and day two, the Union won day two. Okay, so now both sides are exhausted. We're going to discuss day three. General Lee strongly believed the South had come very close to breaking the Union lines. He felt that with one more push, the Confederates could gain the decisive victory he had come to Pennsylvania to get, and he was determined to get it. On the previous 2 days, the rebels had concentrated their attacks on the flanks of the Union lines. Lee firmly believed that the commander of the Union troops, General George G. Meade, in all likelihood, had weakened his center to reinforce the embattled flanks. In reality, Meade, during a council of war the evening before, had told his officers that he predicted the Southern troops would attack the middle of his line, and the troops there needed to be prepared and supported. Okay. So Meade strengthened his middle line. For some reason, he just had a feeling that that's where Lee was going to attack. Lee, though, was very confident. He planned to take General George Pickett's division, which consisted of about 5,000 men who had not yet been engaged in battle, to spearhead the attack. This assault would be preceded by the largest artillery barrage of the entire war. Pickett's division would be joined by approximately 10,000 other rebel troops. After the bombardment, they would attempt to cross just over a mile of open land and attack the Union center. While this was going on, General James Longstreet, who was the overall commander of this operation, would order General Stuart and his cavalry to circle around to the rear of the Union lines. General Ewell would once again attack the Federal right flank at Culp's Hill, as he had the previous 2 days. If he could break through at about the same time Pickett was assailing the Union front and Stuart was attacking in behind the Union position, the plan would succeed. So let's talk about Pickett. Pickett's charge. As the day unfolded, everything went according to plan. More than 100 Confederate cannons began firing on Union positions. The goal was to wipe out Union artillery, which would be used against Pickett's division. Shortly after the Confederates began firing, the Union guns responded for 2 hours, besides exchanged cannon fire. Okay, so for the first 2 hours, there was cannon fire. Unfortunately, because there was so much smoke coming from so many cannons, neither side could tell if their fire was effective. As it turned out, many of the Confederate shells were doing little to no damage. On the other hand, Union shells were landing in the woods where rebel forces were concealed, causing many casualties. Okay. So the Union cannons caused many casualties. The Confederate fire wasn't really accomplishing anything. At about 3 p.m., Longstreet reluctantly ordered Pickett to make his charge. He could tell the carnage would be terrific, and he was still against the assault. More than 12,000 Confederate troops appeared from the woods as they began making their way across nearly a mile of open fields. Okay, so remember, the first thing that's going to happen is now Pickett needs to move in position. And Pickett has to cross these open fields. Okay, so he starts crossing the open fields. As the Confederate forces moved closer to Union lines, they were subjected to intense artillery and musket fire. All 16 of Pickett's commanders were killed or wounded. Only a few hundred of the Confederate troops ever made it to the Union lines, where they were quickly repulsed. The remaining soldiers limped back to the Confederate lines, badly beaten, Now remember, repulse means to turn away or defeat. So they were repulsed. They were defeated. The remaining soldiers limped back to the Confederate lines badly beaten. So it says only a few hundred made it to the Union lines. Okay. Seeing the condition of his army, Lee was concerned the Union troops would launch a counterattack against his position. As men returned from the battlefield, he attempted to get them into defensive positions. At one point, he ordered Pickett to gather his division, to which Pickett is said to have replied, "Sir, I have no division." As it turned out, Northern forces were just as exhausted and could not mount a counterattack. A temporary truce allowed the dead and wounded to be gathered. The battle was over. Aftermath. The Confederate Army limped back to the Potomac River, badly damaged by the battle. In all, more than 45,000 men had been killed or wounded during the three-day campaign. While the casualties were fairly even, the impact of the final day was felt a long time. For once, the Union had soundly defeated General Lee. However, that was not the only defeat the South would suffer. Okay, so the Battle of Gettysburg cost them 45,000 men. So the Battle of Gettysburg cost them 45,000 men. And this is both sides. This is the total casualties from both sides. However, this was not the only defeat the South would suffer. Out of the West, General Ulysses S. Grant was accepting the surrender of Vicksburg. At the same time, the dead and wounded were being gathered at Gettysburg. Finally, Abraham Lincoln and the rest of the Union could see that an end of war was on the horizon, even though it would take 2 more years to arrive. More important for the long term, the English and French saw the defeat as a reason not to support the Confederacy. It was clear that the South was not going to be able to sustain its independence, and they did not want to have issues with the United States. The absence of foreign aid and supplies, coupled with the strangling blockade the Federal Navy had established around the southern coastline, condemned the Confederacy to a slow death. Okay, it said that Grant accepted the surrender at Vicksburg. Let's review. Before completing the problem set, make sure you understand the main points of the lesson. The Battle of Gettysburg was important for 4 reasons. It marked the beginning of the end of the Civil War. English and French economic aid depended on the outcome of the battle. When the battle was lost, all hope for European aid came to an end. The South was finding it difficult to replace fallen soldiers, so the war needed to end soon with a Confederate victory. Another Southern victory would have badly damaged Northern morale. As it was, the battle lifted hopes for the North. Okay, This caused England and France refused to aid the South. Lee believed the rebel army needed to attack the center of the Union lines, thinking it was the weakest there. The Union commander, General Meade, anticipated Lee's strategy and strengthened the Union middle. The largest bombardment of the war took place between hundreds of cannons for about 2 hours. General George Pickett's division made a famous attack on Union positions, and many of the men were wounded or killed. The battle was a major victory for the North and came just 1 day before Confederate forces surrendered Vicksburg to Grant. Okay, go ahead and review this lesson and answer the questions.